This video is going to be a celebration of the Jews. So what are the Jews as we know them today? Well, they are a group that always cause quite a stir wherever they go. They arrived in Europe sometime before 600 AD, but by 629 AD, King Dagobert of France expelled all the Jews from France. Jews were expelled from England in 1290, Austria in 1298, France again in 1394, in several German states in the 1400s, Spain in 1492, Naples in 1493, Portugal in 1496, Bavaria in 1551, and the Papal States excluding Rome in 1569. By then, most Jews had moved into Eastern Europe, especially the Russian Empire, and particularly Poland, which eventually became part of the Russian Empire. Then, by the late 1800s, you started having pogroms in the Russian Empire, and by the 1940s, the Nazis did, of course, what they did to the Jews. Between 1947 and 1972, the Jewish population of the Middle East dwindled as they fled Muslim persecution, all according to Wikipedia. This time period of Jews leaving the Middle East also happens to correspond to when these countries were being released from Britain and France. So as soon as these Muslim countries were released, they expressed views of Jews similar to those of Eastern Europeans and Germans did 20 years prior. In Algeria, for example, there were over 100,000 Jews there at the time of Algerian independence in 1962, but by 1990 there were only around 70, and today that number is virtually zero. There are virtually no Jews in Algeria. And there are plenty of sites that go into far more detail on this stuff, pointing out all the expulsions from all these little city-states and principalities. And there's even some scuttlebutt today about anti-Jewish attitudes in China. And there's all sorts of little things like Jewish sect expelled from Guatemalan village after clashes with Mayan villagers. And of course, there's no way to document every single little event like this, but it raises the question, why is anti-Jewish sentiment so common that it has its own word, anti-Semitism? Disliking some other race or ethnicity is just called racial animosity or religious animosity. Anti-black sentiment isn't called anti-Bantuism or something like that. Well, I think it comes from Jews being a very forward-thinking people, a people ahead of their time, or of any time for that matter. Let's take affirmative action, for example. From a 2009 Quinnipiac poll on whether non-whites should be given racial preferences, the general public opposed such policies by 19 points, but the far-sighted Jews still support such policies by a margin of 4 points. When asked if affirmative action policies were worth pursuing even if they resulted in fewer opportunities for whites, the general public said no by a margin of 30 points. So that framing as being harmful to whites caused the general public to be even more opposed to affirmative action than before. But not so with Jews. When framed as being harmful to whites, Jews go from supporting of affirmative action by 4 points to supporting it by 9 points. Being harmful to whites increases their support for it, showing that Jews truly have the courage of their convictions. And much of the world just isn't ready for that courage. In contrast, blacks go from supporting affirmative action 78-14 to only supporting it 48-40 when it's framed as being harmful to whites. So blacks become less supportive of affirmative action when it's framed as being harmful to whites, where Jews become more supportive of it. The poll also asked participants whether they favored affirmative action in hiring, promotions, and college admissions for 3 groups: blacks, Hispanics, and white women. The general public opposed this by a margin of 28 points in the case of blacks, 30 points for white women, and 35 points for Hispanics. Jews favored such policies by a margin of 7 points for Hispanics, 13 points for blacks, but opposed it by a margin of 8 points for white women. Now, this may seem inappropriate given that white women have lower median incomes than black men and are very close to those of black women. But you must understand that Jews as a group, and I'm generalizing here, are very sophisticated thinkers who understand something called white privilege. And Jews were very important in creating this doctrine of white privilege. And once you understand it, what looks to the untrained eye like anti-white racist contradictions on the parts of Jews actually begin to make more sense. And having these views may come from Jews just being so well educated. In an article by Ron Unz, who is Jewish, in the American Conservative, he wrote about how Jews are certainly overrepresented at elite universities, but more importantly, they are overrepresented all out of proportion of the various proxies for merit that they have. What's compelling to know is that several Ivy League universities, there are straight up more Jews than non-Jewish whites. And from 2007 to 2011, at least, non-Jewish whites were a simple minority of Ivy League graduates. So Unz came up with the criteria for classifying high ability students, and using this criteria, he found that Jews are overrepresented by a factor of 3.5 relative to their proportion of high ability students, while non-Jewish whites were only 33%, a third of what they should be at the Ivy Leagues. Jews have less overrepresentation at places like MIT, Caltech, Stanford, Berkeley, and UCLA, but even there, they are still overrepresented relative to their proportion of high ability students, according to Unz. Also, in proportion to the college-age population, whites are straight up less represented at elite universities than blacks and Hispanics. Now, this isn't controlling for high merit applicants because, as Unz points out, the number of black and Hispanic high merit students is virtually zero. So there's no point in comparing black and white representation relative to merit, because black merit is 0. And so you would just be dividing by 0 and find that, well, the correct number of blacks at these elite institutions is 0, and so blacks are infinitely overrepresented relative to their merit. Same with Hispanics. All of this is to say that Jews are very, very well educated. And so these people, the Jews, are in an excellent position to tell these people, non-Jewish whites, just how privileged they are. And there's a very good chance that Jews made this happen. Kadushin analyzed authors who were recently published in the top 20 academic journals in America and found that Jews accounted for 50% of all intellectuals, 56% of social scientists, and 61% of humanities scholars in the top 20 journals. Also, Zuckerman looked at the percentages of university faculty that were Jewish and found that there were 36% of law, 34% of sociology, 28% of economics, 26% of physics, 24% of political science, 22% of history, 20% of philosophy, and 20% of mathematics. This has also been true historically, with Jews being vastly overrepresented in academia in Europe in the past. Add to this their overrepresentation in media, not just today, but throughout all of history wherever there were a large number of Jews, and we can see that the Jews can really drive a narrative. Lin looked at 5 analyses of Jewish representation in media elites and found massive Jewish control of media, nearly half of what is called the new establishment, meaning the media. In the book The Media Elite, America's New Power Brokers, Robert Lichter reports on a representative survey of 238 journalists from America's top news organizations and found that 59% of them were Jewish. A 1990 list of the top 10 entertainment companies found that 8 of their CEOs were Jewish: Time Warner, Paramount, CBS, Fox, Columbia Pictures, Viacom, ABC, and MCA Incorporated. So let's not be bashful about it. Jews kinda run the media, or at least half of it. And to be anti-media is, well, in degree, to be anti-Jewish. So cool it with the anti-Semitic remarks, Mr. Limbaugh. Same with you, Sticks, X, and Hammer, always talking about the dishonest media. When you point out all the stuff that the drive-by media says, did you even once consider that this liberal media you keep going on about is mostly Jewish? That the media as a whole might be around half Jewish, as however you define it, and that the liberal proportion of this media might be something like 3/4 Jewish? But there's more than just that. From the paper, The Jewish Vote, Political Power and Identity in U.S. Elections, Gil Troy found that in the 2016 election, the top 50 political donors, 40% of them were Jewish. Jews made up 25% of Republican mega donors and 79% of Democrat mega donors. And a paper from Lerner, Nagai, and Rothman looked at the views of what they called elites versus those of the regular public, and of Jews versus non-Jews. Elites were defined as, quote, high-ranking military officers, corporate business leaders, corporate law partners in major law firms, upper-level federal servants, journalists working for the leading news media, primetime television producers, directors and writers, major motion picture writers and directors, and leaders of the public interest. And what is noteworthy is that the non-Jewish elite was moderately conservative. In 1980, even the Jewish public voted for Reagan, but not the Jewish elite. As a result, instead of having an elite in the United States with views largely in sync with that of the American public, because Jews represent about a third of the elite as defined here, we end up with an elite that is ideologically opposed to the general American public. And of course, this is good because it has allowed for a Jewish agenda to be pushed, where we get women out of the home and out of having families and getting women working, becoming worker bees refugees and worker units not having kids. We have more people suddenly becoming transsexual. We have a much wider range of biodiversity in the area of STDs thanks to these changes. And we have a larger proportion of net fiscal takers that we imported thanks to the 1965 Immigration Act. After all, money is meant to be spent on diversity is the spice of life, and you only live once and all that. And perhaps this adoration of diversity is why, in a 2012 poll, Jews had a higher rating for Muslims than for the Christian right, rating Muslims at 41.4 and the Christian right at 20.9. In addition, in a Pew survey, white evangelicals rated Jews at 69, the highest rating that white evangelicals gave to any group other than themselves. But the Jews were not fooled by this flattery. The Jews rated evangelical Christians at 34, the lowest of any religious group, even lower than Muslims. And again, perhaps it's because Jews are such deep thinkers, that they're able to have such dislike towards whites who are very favorable to them. And it's because of this that they got kicked out of so many European countries in the past. As I said, Jews appear to be ahead of their time all the time, with very sophisticated reasoning that just looks like traitorous hypocrisy to the untrained eye. But you wouldn't know because you haven't been educated to the degree that they have. This apparent contradiction exists even among Jews in Israel, for the Jews in Israel oppose, by a 69-point margin, taking Syrian refugees into Israel, but they support, by a margin of 8 points, European countries taking in Syrian refugees. To the untrained eye, it may seem that Israeli Jews think they're God's gift to the world and won't sully themselves with Syrian mass immigration. So go ahead and dump them on the white people's homeland. That's the dumping ground. My home is precious and sacred. So let's dump this chaff off into your home. That's what it seems like until you understand the deep and complex situation of Israel. It's really deep and complex and just precious people, the most precious, the chosen people, in fact. And the majority of Israeli Jews straight up support expelling Arabs. And consider this statement from the Democracy Institute Peace Index. Quote, 52% of Jewish Israelis identify with the statement of MK Miri Regev last month that African migrants are a cancer in the body of the nation. And over a third condone anti-migrant violence, according to the Israeli Democracy Institute. Now, such sentiments, if uttered by a white person in the United States, would be considered fringe, radical, marginal hate speech. And such a person wouldn't even have friends in the quote-unquote alt-right. But about a third of Israeli Jews support outright violence against the blacks in Israel. Where are the alarm bells on that? And if white people came up with a religion that said that they were God's chosen people and called it something like, oh, I don't know, Christian identity, they would immediately be considered a racist hate group. But that's what Jews in Israel literally are. Or if Farrakhan does this with the Nation of Islam, says that his people are God's chosen people, his ethnic group are God's chosen people, that's a hate group. But Judaism is not. But see, this is Israel we're talking about. Israel is a special case. Israel is exceptional. Listen to Dennis Prager tell you about Judeo-Christian values and why the surge is going to fix things in Iraq, all right? So Jews have this knack. They have this really good knack of threading the needle between tradition and cosmopolitanism. Wonderful people. Wonderful people. I love them. I guess I should wrap this up by guarding against anti-Semitic remarks. A lot of people hate political party establishments as they're overwhelmingly beholden to the donors, and that's as good as far as it goes, but the donors happen to be overwhelmingly Jewish, in the Democrat Party especially. So when you're against the party establishment and why the party establishment seems to be doing things at odds with the base, cool it with the anti-Semitic remarks, because that is largely a reflection of the Jewish influence on the party to get the parties to deviate from what the people want. And by pointing that out, you're pointing out the effects of Jewish influence, and you're being very anti-Semitic in doing so. So please, Cool it with the anti-Semitic remarks there. Don't say that stuff anymore. And I didn't really get into that much here, but Jews are also overwhelmingly overrepresented in banking and finance, or finance, insurance, and real estate, or the FIRE sector. So if you really think greedy bankers were engaging in a pyramid scam with the subprime lending crisis, for example, well, that's fine as far as it goes, but you really need to cool it, because that's by extension an anti-Semitic remark because of the overwhelming influence of Jews in the FIRE sector. If you're anti-media and you think the media is crap and the institutional media is a bunch of liars, well, the institutional media is where Jews have the most inordinate influence, where you can comfortably say that they are a straight-up majority controller of institutional media. So if you're tempted to say something about the lying press or the drive-by media, well, cool it, okay? Cool it with the anti-Semitic remarks. And if you're opposed to a country having a genetic standard of citizenship, or against a country revoking citizenship based on race and deporting second and third generation blacks to random locations in Africa, cool it with the anti-Semitic remarks, okay? Why are you so anti-Israel? Or if you're against a 20-foot high concrete border wall, well, excuse me, why are you so anti-Israel? If you say that academics, especially the social sciences, are hackery and fraud, and having philosophy and sociology on the same campus as astrophysics and chemical engineering gives the humanities a legitimacy they don't deserve, okay, you need to cool it with the anti-Semitic remarks there. Those soft sciences and humanities, that's where Jews like to go. So stop saying that Jews are academic frauds by extension of saying that the fields they go into are dubious or not rigorous or not objective or even kind of difficult, or that they're not really that meritorious of applicants in the first place, that they got in because of Jewish connections and then they went into easy pseudo-academic fields where they can pontificate on their politics instead of having to do real work all day. That's what you're saying when you're saying STEM is better than the humanities. And lastly, if you're one of those people who say that the courts are out of control, or that the courts have gone rogue, or that the United States has become so litigious that it's impossible to do anything, well then you really need to cool it with the anti-Semitic remarks there, bucko, as Jews make up 38% of the Supreme Court judges, 36% of law faculty, and in all likelihood a similar proportion of lawyers. So by having negative views of lawyers and negative views of the courts in the United States filing injunctions against anything Trump wants to do, for example, you are having negative views against that which is quintessentially Jewish. So to wrap it up, are you against mainstream political party leadership? Cool it with the anti-Semitic remarks. Are you against institutional media and think they're liars? Cool it with the anti-Semitic remarks. Are you against the FIRE sector, finance, insurance, and real estate, and think they're full of scammers in bed with the government and create pyramid schemes that make them rich but then result in recessions for the rest of us? Cool it with the anti-Semitic remarks. Do you regret the notion that soft sciences and humanities are even on the same campus as STEM and think that lends false legitimacy to non-STEM pseudo-intellectuals? Cool it with the anti-Semitic remarks. And what's amazing about all this is that I finally have data, thanks to Sean, that meshes very well with a lot of what else I've been saying. That everything is ethnic. That what I would call shitlib opinions, well guess what? Those are Jewish opinions. And now I can finally say with confidence that the shitlib opinions on trannies, or even on gays, or on interracial marriage, that wouldn't exist if not for Jews. Whether or not these are good things is another debate. You obviously know what I think on that. But there was a phrase I heard from this guy, Black Acid Lizard, a long time, and he would say to shitlibs, "Your mind has been Jewed." And when he would say that, I'd be like, "Ooh, that's pretty rough there, buddy. That's kind of going in rough and raw. But your mind has been Jewed. Where's the lie?" Even if they're not the majority of power everywhere, they are the driving force behind open borders, mixed marriages, the destruction of the family unit, and women having careers instead of babies. And if you think these things are good, well then yay Jews. But the hell of it is, you would almost certainly not think that any of this was good, if not for Jewish media, right? Jewish media, which I believe we can now say is a real thing. We can now say Jewish media, and that's accurate. That's not conspiracy stuff. And Jewish social science, quote unquote, causing you to adopt these Jewish values. And obviously these are wonderful, fantastic things, so let's just say it loud and proud that Jews are on the cutting edge of all this stuff. Jews are ahead of their time doing all this stuff, and Jews are absolutely wonderful. They're just fantastic people. Fantastic people. High IQ, doing just wonderful stuff. Really showing us the way. Really showing us how to live better than we would without them. That was a spicy one. I plan on this being the only video on Jews I make, as videos on this topic in particular tend to get taken down, though as you can see I am very pro-Jewish, so I should be fine. If you like this video here, I would recommend some other videos in the frames, and if you're feeling generous, you can donate via Patreon or Maker Support. With Patreon, you can donate on a per video basis versus a monthly basis on Maker Support. Thanks for watching, and I'll have a new video on the myth of prejudice coming out soon.